Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, trying to become a smarter city can sometimes be painful. For instance, a plan to develop a citywide broadband system hit two bumps this week. One was a potential legal challenge over who will administer it, and the other is a city council investigation questioning conflicts of interest. There were no likes of either from the mayor's office. Elsewhere, former Congressman Cedric Richmond left the White House for a party job, and Steve Scalise had concerns over what he considered to be incendiary comments during the January 6th debacle. We'll also catch up with the latest on COVID from someone who experienced it. And as the Jazz Fest begins, we will hear a columnist's thoughts on board member perks. All of this plus a mayor's veto and the Pelicans making things interesting. They're on the schedule for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. And from the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Will Sutton, columnist, Tyler Bridges, reporter, and Matt Sledge, staff writer. All right, guys, welcome to the show, all of you. And we are going to go over to Will first, and we're going to talk about COVID because you experienced it.
I did, and anybody who's watched this program when I've been on or read my columns, see me on the street or elsewhere, knows that I've kind of been Mr. COVID conservative, and following whatever guidance and even lagging behind that guidance to be more careful than the general populace. So even with everything that's been going so well recently, I have continued to mask up indoors and fully vaccinated, boosted, and I caught COVID. So it was not a pleasant experience, unexpected. I was looking forward to the day where I could say I went through the pandemic without catching it, and then it happened. And
it can happen, because, I mean, it's happened to a lot of people who have been fully vaccinated, boosted at least to some degree. And as you said, you know, in all of your writings, you have just really been the cautious one. You have really just encouraged caution. You've been concerned about the mask mandates being lifted. You know, you've written about that. So I bet you were really stunned that you got it.
And I have a number of friends, colleagues, associates who have caught it, but they were asymptomatic. That was not the case for me. It put me on my butt. And to catch it so hard, I tell you what, I'm so glad I was vaccinated and boosted, because if that had hit me the way that it did early in the pandemic before vaccines, I definitely would have been one of the people in the hospital and maybe not here today.
Will, do you have any thoughts about where you caught it, how it happened?
I have not a particular thought about exactly who and where, but because I went to some indoor activities that involved eating and drinking, there are not many of us in New Orleans who eat and drink without talking and laughing and sharing, so I have no doubt that when I pulled the mask down to eat and drink and do the Will Sutton bellow, I probably caught it and may have gifted it to someone else.
You know, the circumstances right now in terms of the infection rates, et cetera, in the area, hospitalization, we have definitely seen it all go down. We're feeling a little bit better about it. I mean, but, you know, yours is a case in point. It is still out there and people can still get ill.
It is still out there, and I'm really glad that we're doing so much better. It's really good that we're doing so much better. It doesn't mean people should no longer worry about whether to get the vaccines. If you don't have the vaccine, please get the vaccine. Talk with your healthcare professionals and find out what your circumstances are. If you're eligible for the booster, please get the booster. All of these are a matter of protections that add up in layers, but it does not mean you cannot catch COVID. It reduces the seriousness of the type of cases that you get. I was fortunate enough to be prescribed an antiviral, Paxlovid, and that was very helpful. So without the vaccine, without booster, without an antiviral, those would be things that would have put me at a really bad situation.
Will, when it was at its worst, what did you experience?
When it was at my worst, I had fatigue, chills. I had other things happening with my body that I don't want to put on TV. It really was not a pleasant experience. I would go 2 or 3 hours, start to feel better, and then hit a wall and have to lay down and rest, which ended up meaning going to sleep for another few hours.
And how long
and so
did
it was
that,
very comfortable.
How long did that last? How
So
long
that was over a couple of days. I went out with friends one that Sunday evening, and I tested before I did that because I didn't want to take the chance that I was going to spread COVID. So I tested, and I tested negative. This was after some of the initial symptoms. After that evening, I started going back to some of the symptoms, and then the next morning it was not feeling great, but I had an interview to do, went to WBOK, felt okay, but then it started coming on a little later. And Tuesday I tested, and I tested positive very fast.
Just immediately. Well, we're happy to have you here and feeling better. And you still, I know, you're a mask believer.
I am indeed, and wore it here today, taking it off for this interview, but I'll be putting it back on.
Okay, well, I'll be careful. Okay, Will, thanks a lot. Matt, over to you. Latest developments in the whole smart city thing, some rapid changing going on here.
Yeah, last week I was on the show and I said that the smart city project was on shaking ground. Now it has fallen through the sinkhole. On Monday, the private consortium that was going to partner with the city backed out, and the mayor's office said they were going to issue a new solicitation for bids. Cox, the second place bidder, quickly said, not so fast. We want a chance to hammer out a deal with the city. And then on Wednesday, there was this big showdown of a city council hearing where a top Cantrell deputy was hauled in front of the city council and asked over 3 hours of questions about his dealings during the contract solicitation process.
Let me just clarify, this is a plan to develop a citywide broadband system.
Yes and no. You know, there are broadband elements, there are public Wi-Fi elements, there are smart stop sign and street light elements, but the critics of this plan have always said there aren't enough specifics about, actual fiber in the ground and public Wi-Fi facilities. The city has said that it was kind of in the process of fleshing out some of those finer details.
Okay, so just to sort of backtrack a little bit, the consortium was going to be part of a one-year deal with the city. And do we know what was going to be done in that 1 year?
It was originally supposed to be a 15-year deal, and then in the face of some of this criticism, Mayor LaToya Cantrell's administration scaled things down to this 1 year deal, and it seemed like it was more of a deal to get to a deal than anything else. It was supposed to include some pilot demonstration projects, and they were supposed to kind of showcase this technology over that first year while they were working on the details of the 15-year plan. But it was, I think it's safe to say that the 1 year deal was a little bit not fully fleshed out yet.
Yeah, and council was certainly complaining about that. That's one reason why they had summoned the administration official, Rhodes is his last name, right? And as you said, he was up there, answering their questions for several hours. Now, and Cox has been complaining. They lodged a protest right away, saying they thought maybe this was a little bit of inside dealing here. So can you explain that and the role of Mr. Rhodes?
Sure. Cox's argument has been that they think this contract was steered to this winning consortium, which involves Qualcomm and an investment firm co-founded by the basketball legend Magic Johnson. Cox has been saying they think this contract was steered from the get-go, that it was kind of written for these companies, and that the fix was in, essentially. And then just last week, new questions arose because this official, Jonathan Rhodes, the director of the mayor's office of utilities, as it emerged, had some kind of off-the-clock dealings with Qualcomm, where he advised them on a smart city project in Los Angeles. And Cox hadn't even known about that in their bid protest. I think if they had known about that, that would have figured in very prominently in their complaints.
Okay, so City Council, what action did they take? They passed a couple of resolutions.
Yeah, they've asked the Inspector General to take a close look at this smart city project and at the mayor's direction of some city money, some Wisner Trust money, toward a nonprofit that she essentially controls that has a mayor's fund. So they're asking the Inspector General to come in, take a close look at all of this. And of course, there's this ongoing City Council investigation, which is a real rarity. The last time something similar happened was 34 years ago.
Yeah, that was really something to watch for sure. Okay, we'll see where all of this moves along then. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Thank you.
All righty, we go next to Tyler. And you wrote a piece about some alleged comments that Steve Scalise made soon after the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. So tell us more about that. What did he allegedly say, and what are people thinking about it?
Yeah, well, it's not alleged what he said. These are comments that he made that will be made public in a book that's coming out next week by 2 New York Times reporters. And they are basing the report on Scalise and also Cedric Richmond based on comments that they made in taped phone calls. And so they released, these 2 New York Times reporters initially wrote a story, and it came out about Kevin McCarthy has made certain statements right after January 6th that he wanted to really distance himself from President Trump. Remember, January 6th is when the pro-Trump crowd attacked the Capitol, trying to stop the election of certification of Joe Biden as president. Mm-hmm. So the story came out in the New York Times about Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, but mostly about McCarthy, and again, wanting to distance himself from Trump. And McCarthy said, well, it never happened. And then the New York Times reporters released the audio tapes where, well, they showed that he had said those things. So Scalise was a smaller piece of it, but Scalise's comments were to talk about wanting that the Republicans should now contemplate a post-Trump House of Representatives. So it also came out separately a couple days ago that Scalise in another audio tape had said right after January 6th that in a phone call that expressing alarm over some of the comments by the fringe members of the House Republican caucus. At one point he said the comments were incendiary. He said that the other were potentially illegal. So this was a bit embarrassing for Scalise to have this information come out. One of the guys that he made a comment about was Representative Matt Gaetz, who is a strong pro-Trumper from Florida. And then Scalise met with Gaetz the next day after this came out. So Scalise has been in the news in a way that I think he would prefer not to.
But how was he responding to this reporting?
Well, he attacked the Messenger, the New York Times, saying it was a liberal media and we should keep the focus on the failed policies of Joe Biden. He also reaffirmed his close commitment to President Trump. Okay,
but you say the reporters have audio tapes of these comments.
Yeah, and the book's coming out next week.
Okay. All right, let's move on over to the White House. And Cedric Richmond, former congressman who had a real important position in the White House, left.
Yeah, he was co-chairman of Joe Biden's presidential campaign. And so when Biden was elected, then he brought then Congressman Richmond to the White House. Cedric Richmond had to resign his safe seat in Congress, and he became really part of the inner circle of the White House. He was a liaison with the business community and with Congress. And but now former Congressman Richmond is going to be leaving that position within the White House. It appears that the president specifically asked him to take a new job where he's going to be a senior strategist for the Democratic National Committee. as we all know, it looks like the Democrats are going to have a difficult time in this fall. So looks like the president has dispatched Richmond to help the Democratic National Committee raise money, get the word out about their policies, and to try to allow the Democrats to hold on to their slim majority in the House.
You know, having Richmond there in the office, you know, in the White House, he had the president's ear. He was right there close to it. So that was good for Louisiana. Is this going to hurt some chances for the state to maybe get some things that we need or want?
Sure, yeah, particularly after Hurricane Ida last year, Cedric Richmond was being very attentive to the needs of Louisiana. But remember, Marcia, that there's another big gun from Louisiana now in the Biden administration, which is the former mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu. So it looks like that Louisiana is still well represented within the Biden White House.
Okie doke. Thanks a lot, Tyler. We're going to move on over right now to Errol and some more local politics. The mayor of New Orleans, LaToya Cantrell, vetoed an ordinance passed by council. Explain that to us.
Yeah, this is Councilman Morell who proposed that the charter be amended so that any appointments by the mayor, high-level appointments, administrative appointments, had to be approved by the council. Sort of like what goes on in Washington, you know, with the Senate having to approve presidential appointments. There was a vote, and it passed 4-1 that it would have to happen, that you need to have approval. Now, Cantrell vetoed it, and so now it's going to have to go, and they're saying they can try to override it. With 4-1 vote, you can pass it. To override it takes a 5-1 vote, and there are 7 members. There were 2 members who weren't there that day. And so if one of those members who weren't there that day, if the other votes hold, then they can override it. Ultimately what happens is it's going to have to be approved by the voters.
Right.
What's curious about this is that this form of governance was created in 1954 when they created the President Home Rule Charter. And back then the concept for cities was to have strong mayor-type governments. They really saw that there was more unity with making the mayor strong. So it wasn't uncommon to have a mayor pretty much carte blanche for making the high-level appointments. In New Orleans, what was a little bit unusual is that they created a position of chief administrative office. And originally the charter said the police chief, and this is the most important of all the appointments, police chief is appointed by the chief administrative officer. And so that's the way it went for many years. Now the reality was that the mayor appointed the CAO, and so ultimately the mayor got whoever we wanted, that the CAO was just a formality. Finally, they did away with that, and so it is directly the mayor who appoints the police chief. I tell you, I've been trying to think back, as far as I can remember. You know, there have been many police chiefs appointed by mayors. I can't think of anyone like who was a disaster, you know, who damaged the mayor's career. It's really the most important decision that a mayor makes, and so a mayor's going to want to work hard and get the right person. And so I don't think you can look back and say, well, look at these people who were elected. Now, you can say, the argument on the other side would be, if you brought it before the council could bring up issues that maybe didn't come up in previous discussions, and maybe they can broaden the discussion. And so it's kind of, you know, there's no right side on this, really. It's, you know, do you follow the federal presidential model, or do you do something more in common with the way that cities do it? But we're waiting for a showdown on it pretty soon.
Yeah, and it's just another example. And Matt just talked about one example. Here's another of this council now really being at odds with the administration.
Yeah, and Cantrell's opposing it, but the fact is it really makes no difference for her because she's a lame duck right now. And so, if, you know, her appointments have been done. I mean, I guess there might be a new appointment that'll emerge during the time, and so it's going to really be an issue for the next mayor.
And council also is, you know, arguing, number one, they'd like to see this happen, but first off, they'd like to give the voters a chance to say yay or nay to it. And
yeah, and ultimately that's what it is. And then, but it becomes a question once you do that. I guess the argument is that when people see Congress, when they see somebody's nominated, and they see these long sessions and subcommittees and going before committees, how it can drag out, that people I don't think want that, even though it wouldn't be that because a council is only 7 members. It's not like a Congress is. And so I think they want something that's that's more efficient. But is it good to have council review, or should you just trust on the wisdom of the mayor?
All righty, E, thanks a lot. Let's go on back over to Will right now. And, you know, we've talked about this a little bit on the show, but you definitely had some opinions on the whole Jazz Fest, former presidents and their tickets issue. You've been on a lot of boards, so you definitely have some thoughts about what the real duty of a board member is.
Well, let's first of all separate those who have the opportunity and responsibility on corporate boards where you get paid money to sit and participate, and in some cases really big money, you know, $100,000, $250,000 to be a part of that. So we're talking about nonprofit boards because the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation, which owns the Jazz Fest, is a nonprofit board. And we're talking about an event that has multiple days, has about a $300 million economic impact or more these days, and raises a lot of money and does a lot of good for community organizations in this area. But the Jazz Fest is an extra special event, and people like to have parking and food and get up close to the stages. And if you've been a board member, particularly president, you have extra special access. I don't have any problem with that. I think with the board service that I've had on very different types of boards, community boards, education boards, National Association of Black Journalists, you expect to you know, put in your time as service, not to be paid for it, but as service. And in return for that, some cases you might get a ticket here, a ticket there, but we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars worth of benefits. And in the case of the foundation, with that continuing long after your service has concluded. Mm-hmm. So I last served on the National Association of Black Journalists board 2003. In my case, as a past president, to use some of the principles based on this lawsuit, I should still be benefiting in ways that the current board serving receives benefits. Granted, it's limited benefits compared to a Jazz Fest, but I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the right idea for service. I think when your service is done, your benefits should be over.
So
not only that, but people on nonprofit boards are also expected to give. I mean, that's one of the things when they're interviewed. They say, you know, you're expected to make a contribution to this. And
that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about boards. There are a few boards where you're not expected to give, but in most cases, you're expected to give at least $5 just so you can say that you have contributed to the cause that you are serving. And you're expected to give more than you get. It's an important function to help set strategic vision, strategy, and all, not run day to day, and certainly not to take advantage of an organization, its staff, or the activities.
Okay, all righty. Well, thanks a lot. Well,
Hey, Marcy, if I could just jump in real quick,
Sure.
while with this talk of Jazz Fest, can we I want to give a shout out for the tie that Errol's wearing today. Look at that Jazz Fest tie.
He's definitely keeping in theme of the weekend. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
it's good for once a year, and this is the day.
Oh, come on.
It definitely is. All right, well, thanks a lot.
love
E, we're going to stick with you because it's been fun watching the Pelicans.
Yeah, what the story was this year, the franchise has been in trouble in New Orleans. You know, it started off not having good attendance, and then it had to move for 2 years to Oklahoma City after Katrina, and then there's been a lot of turnover, and the teams haven't been all that successful. And so this year started off really bad. The team was going 2-12, had a new coach, Willie Green. He said things will get better, and all of a sudden they did. I gotta tell you, the way the season is ending, it's not uncommon that when a team ends a season well, that they say, okay, wait till next year. Look what we're doing. I mean, you know, we're showing progress. Well, next year never really comes because the other teams are having their next year also. But this year there really seems to be a really good reason to believe for next year. If you read the national press and the local press, they're singling out this franchise as one that really seems to have a lot of momentum. During the season, they picked up some rookies who turned out to be really, really impressive. They were at the all-star level rookies, a couple of other players they picked up. And if you look at the way that the team played, in the last month of the season, in the playoffs they were playing Phoenix, which was the #1 team in the whole NBA, and they gave them a tough time. They went down 4-2, but they could have easily won last night. And so I think there's encouragement for this franchise. The big question, of course, is Zion Williamson, and that's not totally resolved yet. I think it can at least be said, if for some reason he doesn't come back, we still have a good team. If he does come back, we have a very good team. And there's going to be a lot of financial issues having to do with his contract this year, whether or not he comes back. But one way or the other, people are just, I've never seen a season for this franchise that finished so high emotionally in terms of the way that people feel. And Willie Green, who's the coach, just seems to be just a really great salesman for the team.
Yep.
And what was so special about this particular game was having Chris Paul, who was one of the first new members of the New Orleans Hornets, who came here as a superstar. Didn't have a great career, but and he's been the star at Phoenix. Scored 33 points last night. Made 14 shots in a row, which is a record for playoffs.
Yeah, we got to wrap up right now,
Okay.
but we're going to stay with you. But the Pels made us all proud, that's for sure.
They did, and
Looking forward to their next season.
there is reason to be optimistic for
Good.
next year.
Okay, other stories real quick. E, starting with you.
Okay, tomorrow is election day. It's mostly tax elections in Orleans Parish, a millage for early childhood education, Jefferson Parish for the sheriff's office,
Right.
and in St. Tammany for the DA's office.
Okay, Tyler, over to you.
Yeah, the legislative session, they're a little more than halfway done, and still the big issues ahead are going to deal with money, how they're going to spend this huge amount of money that the legislature has this year.
All right, Matt.
The Will Sutton belly laugh returns to the newsroom.
And here we hear it. It returns to informed sources too. Okay, real quick. Well,
Next week, there's a big generational shift at Liberty Bank. Alden McDonald's done a wonderful job for several decades, and his son Todd becomes the new leader effective next week.
congrats to him. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.